Peter Hill Explains, where I invite you to join the science teaching conversation with me about Immanuel Kant, episode 2. We're just working through this philosopher, so using sort of if you imagine the internet where you can go shallow, this is going a little bit deeper, and we're going with the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophers because this is fairly deep, and the encyclopedia often says, look, it's these shallow people who come in and sort of spearfish certain ideas, sort of go down certain ideas and make up everything else. Really, you've got to spend the time, philosopher by philosopher, and work out where they're coming from, and get that sort of sense for sort of how ancient some of these ideas. So Kant has actually re-caught the monad, which was actually developed by Pythagoras, the first philosopher, and then he's moved around Descartes, but all Descartes, Leibniz, and Kant are fully fledged with the God problem, which is not necessarily a problem that's really can be occupied. It's occupying theologians rather than philosophers at the moment, and sort of the general context here. And the last reading we heard about, well, I think it's almost a private joke with me, the titles of some of Kant's books and what Kant did. This is episode 2, part 2, Kant's project on the critique of pure reason. The main topic, this is a book of the critique of pure reason, is the possibility of metaphysics understood in a specific way. Kant defines metaphysics in the terms of, quote, the cognitions after which reason might strive independently of all experience. So this is deep thought. And his goal in the book is to reach a, quote, decision about the possibility or the impossibility of a metaphysics in general and the determination of its sources as well as its extents and boundaries, or, however, from principles. Close quote. Now, this is strange because this is really moving away from experimental physics. This is what can you work out with your head alone, and it's the rationalist view. I like that. This metaphysics for Kant concerns a priori knowledge, or knowledge whose justification does not depend on experience. He associates a priori knowledge with the reason. So a priori, as I know this in advance. It's just known in advance. A priori decision. I had a really funny conversation with the taxi driver about needing a priori knowledge to navigate Sydney. And he said, oh, I don't know about that, but you can never tell where you're going. The signs come up and you don't know where the signs are ahead of time. It's really good. Okay, he associates the project for the critique, which is the book, is to examine whether, how, and to what extent human reason is capable of a priori knowledge. 2.1. The crisis of the Enlightenment. To understand the project of the critique better, let us consider the historical intellectual context in which it is written. Something you can't do if you just pick it up. Kant wrote the critique towards the end of the Enlightenment, which was then in a state of crisis. Hindsight enables us to see the 1780s as a transitional decade in which cultural balance shifted decisively away from the Enlightenment towards Romanticism. But the course of Kant did not have the benefit of such hindsight. Now that's interesting. I really, there's romantic philosophers. I really wonder what the difference is. That's my ignorance here. The Enlightenment was a reaction to the rise and the successes of modern science in the 16th and 17th century. A spectacular achievement of Newton in particular engendered widespread confidence and optimism about the power of human reason to control nature and improve human life. One effect of this new confidence in reason was that traditional authorities were increasingly questioned. For why should we need political or religious authorities to tell us how to live our lives or what to believe if each of us has the capacity to figure things out for ourselves? Kant expresses the Enlightenment given to the sovereignty of reason in the critique. And I'm going to go to a quote here, but isn't that fascinating? These people are saying, well, look, people are looking at the origins of the French Revolution, and they say, well, look, people are all starving, and when you starve people in general, you get these big Food prices versus revolution is pretty easy to plot what's going to happen, and there's economic factors, but the idea is that Enlightenment says we're going to figure it out for ourselves. It's pretty amazing stuff. So, did Newton start the French Revolution? Okay, here's a quote from his book. Our age is an age of criticisms to which everything must submit. Religion, though, is holiness, and legislation through its majesty commonly seeks to exempt itself from it. But in this way they excite a just suspicion against themselves, and cannot lay claim to that unfeigned respect that reason gains only to that which has been able to withstand its free and public examination. Lovely quote. Enlightenment is about thinking for oneself rather than letting others think for you. According to what is enlightenment? Well, and also according to Descartes, this is why Descartes really the real first Enlightenment philosopher. It's really fantastic to read him. A few independent thinkers will gradually inspire a broader cultural movement, but ultimately will lead to greater freedom of action and governmental reform. A culture of enlightenment is almost inevitable if only there is quote, freedom to make public use of one's reason in all matters. I think this is interesting, the idea of a corporate person who behaves in a corporate way and doesn't use personal judgment. My view. Okay. The problem is that some of it seemed unclear whether the progress would be in fact ensue if reason enjoyed full sovereignty over traditional authorities, or whether unaided reasoning would instead lead straight to materialism, fatalism, atheism and skepticism, or even to libertarianism and authoritarianism. The Enlightenment commitment to the sovereignty of reason was tied to the expectation that it would not only lead to these consequences, but instead would support certain key beliefs that tradition had always sanctioned. Crucially, these included belief in God, the soul, freedom and capability of science, morality and religion. Although a few intellectuals rejected some or all of these beliefs, the general spirit of the Enlightenment was not so radical. The Enlightenment was about replacing traditional authorities with the authorities of human reason, but it's not about overturning traditional moral and religious beliefs. Yet the original inspiration for the Enlightenment was the new physics, which is mechanistic. If nature is entirely governed by mechanistic causal laws, then it may seem that there is no room for freedom, a soul, or anything but matter in motion. Which is really, really fascinating for me in terms of that you've got these people studying this area and they just poo-poo physics, but physics actually really turbocharged, and it's really interesting if you read Marx as well. This treated the traditional view that morality requires freedom. We must be free in order to choose what is right over what is wrong, because otherwise we cannot be held responsible. It also threatened the traditional religious belief in the soul that can survive death or resurrected in the afterlife. So modern science, the pride of the Enlightenment, the source of optimism about the powers of human reason, threatened to undermine the traditional moral and religious beliefs that freed, rational thought was expected to support. This was the main intellectual crisis of the Enlightenment. The critique of pure reason is Kant's response to the crisis. Its main topic is metaphysics because, for Kant, metaphysics is the domain of reason. It's an inventory of all we possess through pure reason, ordered systematically. Amazing. That's a quote. The authority of reason was in question. Kant's main goal is to show that a critique of reason is, by reason itself, unaided and unrestrained by traditional authorities, establishes a secure, consistent basis for both Newtonian science and traditional morality and religion. In other words, free rational inquiry adequately supports all of these essential human interests and shows them to be mutually consistent. So reason deserves the sovereignty attributed to it by the Enlightenment. This is a major thing, and I think I would say that you may question whether people with science can actually be moral, but I think you can equally say, this is my own view, that people without science, how can they be moral? So moral is science is not a necessary. Is true science a necessary condition for morality? It's sort of one of those things to come across. I'm going to close that off and have another podcast, episode 3, which will be 2.2, Kant's Copernican Revolution in Philosophy. Isn't that going to be great when you hear it? That's item 3. Another podcast, another story comes to a close. It's been a pleasure sharing this moment in time with you. May you discover truly amazing things, understand them, and tell others. Thanks for listening.